Hello, dear friends. We are sincerely glad to greet you again. And today we are going to talk with the esteemed Igor Mikhailovich Danilov.
Hello.
Igor Mikhailovich, in our previous videos, you said that a human being has only been studied 5% out of 100, and this applies to everything that is currently known to science, both in the field of anatomy, what has been studied about a human, what has been observed and described, and in the field of psychology. Thus, it turns out that by 95% we do not know and do not understand who a human being is, what his role is, and how he is arranged. In just the same way, if we speak fractally, the picture repeats itself at the level of our understanding of the universe. Scientists say that 95% of our universe is made up of something that is almost unexplored by us. It is some kind of dark matter and dark energy. So it turns out that the picture is the following, that we, as humans, understand almost nothing about the structure of this world. We understand nothing about the structure of ourselves. We are faced with a lot of challenges and a lot of tasks. And nowadays, more and more often, the following reflections and thoughts sound among people. What if this world in which we currently live is not so real? Because nowadays we have advanced in creating computer games, in creating a virtual reality that is very much similar to this reality we inhabit. But what if this world is only a game invented by someone and the question arises, then who is playing us? I'd like to read out loud just a couple of people's thoughts which they share with each other around the world. Life seems unreal lately. Since childhood, it seems to me that I do not live but train before real life, whereas when real life comes, everything will get better and be normal. I feel like I'm in a game. I don't see meaning in anything here, or like I'm in a dream that I cannot wake up from. A terrible dream has lingered for too long. The following question arises, Igor Mikhailovich. Why are such thoughts that this world is an illusion so widespread precisely nowadays?
Well, as of today, this phenomenon is conditioned not only by the development of technology, first and foremost, but also by other factors. Again, that very climate change. After all, people do feel that very situation, let's say, in our everyday life, in regard to geopolitics, economics, and many other things. Threats are coming from everywhere, but inside, a person feels something different. And this split between personality and consciousness leads to such subjective perceptions of this world as illusory. There is also another factor, double and triple standards, and many other things. One thing happens in life, but we are told something completely different. They promise one thing, but something completely different happens. When the truth begins, let's say, to be called a lie, while lies begin to be imposed as the truth. And this situation, which really drives a person into a state of, I would say, anxiety, to put it gently, leads to the point that a person begins to pay attention to his inner world. Having no experience and no knowledge, a person begins to think, to peer into himself, and, of course, he comes to understand that not everything is as it should be, and that the world is not at all the way it should be. And the scariest thing for people is that they start feeling as personalities. And when they start feeling as personalities, they realize that this is not the situation in which they should be, that this is wrong. It's like a fairy tale in general, or a fantasy, or, let's say, a virtual reality that surrounds them. Also, what does a person feel? Again, friends, we are talking about the third and the fourth types. More, even the fourth type. What does he feel when he perceives his consciousness and begins to understand that it is exactly his consciousness that starts shaping the world which we are accustomed to in our everyday life? Well, as personality, he understands something different, and he feels something different. He feels a different world, the one where what prevails here doesn't exist. I mean, negativity. And this kind of situation, let's say, actually generates these states in people.
There are a lot of people who really describe such states, that they as if observe this world, as if they're behind a glass, and in general, this world is a little bit two-dimensional. They suddenly realize that those feelings which they experienced, love, joy, excitement, some kind of inspiration, all of a sudden, they no longer evoke any enthusiasm at all. Those goals and those dreams which people used to set do not turn on positive emotions or good feelings in them. In other words, people understand that everything seems to be meaningless. Some people don't know what to do about that and load themselves with all sorts of bustle and mundane vanity.
Just to escape from those perceptions through feelings.
Right.
Why? Because a person begins to feel and understand that he is much greater than just a two-legged creature, or, let's say, a participant of contemporary events, that he is, first of all, a human, and everything should be different, while the world is the way it is. For this very reason, a person feels like in a dream, that something is wrong, it's not right, it shouldn't be this way. And even those emotions, as you've said, which used to captivate and inspire a person, now he understands their illusory and transient nature, that they are really sort of imposed. Moreover, he understands that this world actually imposes on him not what should be here at all, but he doesn't know what. And that's the biggest sadness for those people.
A huge dissonance and even some kind of panic arise because
Of
one
course.
doesn't know what to do about that. And what can our modern medical care psychologists and psychiatrists recommend? They themselves do not know how to help a person. They suggest grounding him. Well, this is somehow...
You know, it is easy to make a diagnosis.
Yes.
To give some pill to calm a person down and lull him so that he thinks less about that. But there is a problem. Pills, yes, they work. I understand. However, when a person awakens as personality, spontaneously, due to inner observations and reflections, pills do not work. Then a more serious diagnosis is already made.
Igor Mikhailovich, when they want to ground people, tentatively speaking, so that they focus on the taste of food they eat, many suggest that people feel something tactily, or an advice is given to put a rubber band on a wrist,
And snap with it, right?
snap with it, and so on. In other words, it turns out that we are basically being treated for sanity in some way.
100%. Not knowing about spirituality, not knowing how a human is arranged, and in general, not knowing who a human is. Let's start with that. After all, a human is not a body, a human is not consciousness, he is much more superior. A human is exactly the one who wakes up and doesn't understand where he is and why he is there, and he doesn't understand what this world is for. It's just a spontaneous awakening. At this very moment, those methods are offered to put a rubber band on the wrist in order to bring a person back and suggest that this is your body, this is your consciousness, these are your thoughts, right? You know, it's like a lamb that breaks away from a stall. It runs around and frolics, but they try to drive it back so that it would be like all others and wouldn't stand out. Why? Because such a person is dangerous. What is this done for? If someone free appears, he can destroy the whole system with inconvenient questions and, again, with his own reflections and observations. He fails to find answers in religion and doesn't get satisfaction from politics. Well, again, my friends, how can a sane person who has inhaled at least a little bit of freedom treat such proposals as cannibalism, which are being imposed nowadays? After all, cannibalism is literally being imposed on us, and they say that it's a good thing, so far jokingly and unobtrusively, but already affirmatively. In fact, this is the Overton window, and everyone knows where this leads to. In the same way, other programs were started, which used to frighten, but now they are already at the legislative level. And you cannot say even a word against them. Well, again, why do they turn people into zombies, into animals?
Thank you so much for this question. It is very important. Who benefits from that? Okay, let's those who promote such things eat each other, but who benefits from masses of people eating one another?
I'll put it as follows. Those in whose hands are the fodder and the whip.
What does it give them?
Power.
When people cross this borderline?
Power. A human who crosses the borderline of humaneness becomes just a beast. And it is much easier, my friends, to control a beast than a human. If a human is free, yes, he can be forced, he can be compelled, but he doesn't agree with that, while a beast is a beast. It is easier to deal with it.
Meaning a rigid hierarchy like in the animal world and full control.
100%. And what about our world? Isn't it that way? Look in any organization, everywhere and around. There is a rigid hierarchy and resubordination. Try to go against, let's put it so, the dominant opinion, despite democracy and everything else. If you cross the line of what is permitted to you, they will shut your mouth. Isn't that true? Why? Because it's a threat to their enjoyment of life. I'll put it that way. It is so, indeed. You know, it's actually such a very acute issue.
But I very much like that a lot of people are building a society in which humaneness will actually prevail. That's the most important thing, yes.
The creative
And
society.
I very well remember what you said in the previous videos, that we need to give this world back to the alive. These words have resonated so deeply. It is such a very multifaceted phrase from different perspectives. You understand how important it is for people to become aware of and feel this life, first of all, in themselves. And there are more and more people who, in some different ways, but at least understand that they are much more than just a body.
Of course.
And I also wanted to discuss with you, Igor Mikhailovich, the experience of one woman, a neurobiologist, who suffered a massive stroke, and she actually saw how consciousness, so to say, loses certain functions. So she described the following experience, which helped her to feel maybe God or the state of nirvana, because she had previously been an unbeliever. And she describes the following. At that moment, she felt peace, grace. All the dialogues in her head had stopped. The thoughts that were constantly activating and attacking her completely subsided, quietened down, and that she experienced some kind of a feeling that people achieve during spiritual work on themselves, let's say. She also talked about her sort of sensation of boundlessness, that she had lost the distinction between her own body and that surrounding space, that she had been as if between two worlds, between this real world and some esoteric world, as she calls it. And this very state of expansion is compared to the state of enlightenment. But is it really so? What kind of a state is this at all? What kind of experience has this woman had?
Well, let's start with the fact that this woman had a stroke, and the left lobe of her brain was simply disabled. Well, this is for understanding.
Is it possible to reach a state of bliss by disabling the left hemisphere?
For a very short period of time. But it won't work that way for everyone, due to the fact that she was a scientist. She worked a lot, she thought a lot, and she had good connections between the left and the right hemispheres. If a person doesn't load the brain very much, then by disabling the left, let's say, lobe of the brain, under such a massive hemorrhagic stroke, like she had, it was a massive hemorrhage. It's unlikely that an untrained person would survive. I'll put it so. You see? Therefore, the experience is dangerous, and one shouldn't repeat it, hope for, and dream about it. That's firstly. Secondly, the experience she gained was only a controlled disconnection by her as personality of what had happened. She received information about this world, but she received it directly from secondary consciousness and, again, in very little portions. Primary consciousness was practically non-functional in that case. In other words, she received a little experience of personality and looked at that world, owing to the fact that the connection with consciousness was still preserved, but there was no dominance of consciousness. And as personality, while personality is capable of seeing another world, of perceiving it, she perceived that world too. That is, she received, I'll put it this way, primary experience. Yes, my friends, It is the very primary experience when a person embarks on the spiritual path and already approaches spiritual practices. So, the primary experience in spiritual practices approximately corresponds to these sensations, meaning when a person already gains a certain freedom from his consciousness and begins to understand who he is. Meanwhile, it didn't help that woman. Why? Because she had no knowledge. For her, it was fear, fright, and understanding of the catastrophical scale of the situation. She tried to compensate for all this afterwards and describe how interesting it all was, and so on. Imagine her state.
Panic, fear.
Of course, panic and fear. Why? Because she didn't order that, but it happened. But after gaining this experience, she became convinced of not quite the realness of this world, but which is real for us when we are, again, here and tied to here in the third dimension.
It is very surprising that various religions describe this out-of-body experience, which she also described, that this is a state of enlightenment. In fact, a lot of people have experienced this in their lives, and many of them more than once, especially in childhood, when one has this feeling of voluminousness, of being much bigger and going beyond the boundaries of this body. Yes, maybe at that moment it was some kind of a state, partly a state of sensual ecstasy and a state of not wanting to go back into that body because you didn't even want to move, so as not to scare this feeling away. And you really wanted to return to this state in the future, in your lifetime. But when you already follow the spiritual path, and all of a sudden this feeling comes to you again, you realize that this is merely some side effect.
Nothing more.
And that this is just some kind of an initial stage on the path.
But in many religions, she's right. This is elevated as the ultimate point. You see, people spend their entire lives to encounter the first effects.
Yes, regarding religions, where people indeed devote a lot of time to at least encounter this first effect of out-of-body experience, I very well remember how you said that this is actually very easy to do. It is enough just to close your eyes and feel that you are something greater, at least that you are not just a body, but you are an energy structure.
You see, some religions study this. They study this structure by observing it from the inside. Then they try to study their consciousness when a human as personality, while bypassing primary consciousness, let's say, he pays his attention to secondary consciousness during practice, and he sort of shifts into this secondary consciousness, and the effect of a tremendous expansion arises there, and a person indeed has a sense that he is in nirvana, meaning in the absolute. He has sort of already merged
with the boundless space,
with the system itself, with the boundless space. Do you know what is interesting in these states? A person knows the answer to any question. Everything is known. Any question, and he has the answer, except the spiritual, of course. And this is true. There are no answers to spiritual questions there. There are parables, fairy tales, stories, various experiences, and fantasies of all those who told this from the system.
who enriched
Absolutely right.
the system.
Yes, but there's no truth there. Instead, there are the material answers there. Do you know what the phenomenon is?
What is it?
When a person comes back from there, he knows that he knew everything, and he has this aftertaste. But if he was stupid before he entered there, he comes back again and becomes stupid again.
He can bring nothing here.
Nothing. Even the multiplication table will also have to be learned because he uses what he educated, his consciousness. You know, as they say, you cannot cram more into less. Therefore, you won't be able to bring knowledge from there in any way.
That is why pridefulness probably pushes a person there for this omniscience in order to dive into this ocean of the absolute.
You know, Shaitan pushes him there because the person experiences pridefulness there. He experiences a state of, as they say, divinity. Why did they begin to deny God? They began to exalt the mind. It is because of these states when a person understands how particles move, how worlds are formed. But do you know what he doesn't understand? He doesn't understand who is moving this and what is being done. Yes, he feels his own impact and engagement. This elevates him to the skies. Well, he is a proudling. Proudlings, egoists, and unfortunate people who form themselves as subpersonalities. But there is another branch in this religion, where in addition to careful attitude, let's say, towards all living beings, they also form love in themselves, love for another person.
Compassion for others, right?
Right. These people waste their lives on attaining peace after the death of their physical body. And they are the prevailing majority compared to those who want to become omnipotent. They have such an understanding that Buddha is, well, he's a part of the cosmos. It is when you are there, only being here. When you are here with such a scope of knowledge and that kind of mightiness, those are funny people too.
Igor Mikhailovich, but if we actually speak of some strands and branches of the religion which we are now talking about, without voicing what religion this is,
Everyone will understand anyway.
yes,
People are actually smart, right, friends?
the following question arises. The state of peace in which people reside during the day, this kind of harmonization with the space, balance, and sort of an equable state, does it give the state of peace there?
Of course not. You can even stand on your head all day long, or do whatever you want. In order for a human to earn peace after death, he has to give 10% of his attention to the spiritual world through love.
Exactly love, not this kind of peace.
There's the only entrance. Love. True love at that. Pure alat has to flow. Only through love can a human receive alat. There is no other way. Love grants alat. If there is no love in a human, there will never be alat in him. But a human can have a different kind of love, the one we learned since childhood. Love for ice cream, for candy, for some luxury, for something beautiful, for another physical body, and for many other things. I have emphasized on purpose for another physical body. But what gives life is the spiritual. It is the love of personality for personality, of a soul for a soul, not in fantasies, not in hormones, not in anything else, and not in body dependence, but in reality. When a human as personality sends love, forms it, let's say, even from anti-alat, well, it is easier for women, but nowadays, far from all women have experienced even once in their lifetime what true alat is, so to say. I think there are just a few of such women, to be honest. Isn't this true? Although women are the source of alat, however, this opportunity is closed for them. Why? Because they live by earthly things. That's the trouble, you see? Whereas for men, it's a problem in general. Men do not generate alat, yet they can convert and accumulate it. I mean, convert anti-alat into alat. You and I discussed this.
Yes, that they send anti-alat there.
When a person really forms love for God, love for Allah, not to the dictation of shaitan, but from his soul, and when he directs 100% of his attention to love for Allah, that's when anti-alat turns into alat. This is really within God's power only. But in return, even a man receives alat, which he can accumulate. And if he doesn't spend it on gifts to shaitan, like God has sent it to me. Hey shaitan, look how rich I am. Meanwhile, a lot of people actually do that. Yet if a person preserves it and gives it back to Allah, he receives 100 times more. But it should always be given back. Then you gain life or peace, at least peace. This is very valuable. Well, we discussed this subject.
Igor Mikhailovich, thank you very much for these explanations, because, even within the framework of those religious strands and branches,
we realize how many people there are who really sincerely devote their lives to the spiritual path.
It is such a pity.
They are very disciplined. They can perform some practices on a daily basis. They definitely choose not even the material world sometimes, but exactly following the spiritual path.
That's where the answer is hidden.
And that doesn't lead them anywhere.
Do they really follow the spiritual path? Is this really what they have chosen? They listened to fairy tales from the same people as they are at the moment. About what? About mightiness, strength, and power. Do they actually seek God's love? No. Do they strive for life? No. Yet, whatever the goal is, that's what a person is like. If a person has no goal, he doesn't live. He's an aimless creature. Well, the devil sets 1,000 goals for him every day. But a human should live by the only goal. He has one life and one goal. Which one is up to him to choose? However, after listening to this, like the omnipotence person rushes not towards God, he rushes towards Shaitan. This is really so. I'll put it as follows. Such people are slaves, Shaitan's slaves, slaves of the prince of this world. Don't they know about that? A simple question. Don't they realize that?
They feel that they are going in the wrong direction, that what they are doing is meaningless.
After all, they have emptiness inside, but they try to compensate for this emptiness exactly with the state of nirvana, fusion with the cosmos. They want to merge with Shaitan. Well, when I speak in religious terms, I find it funny myself. It is truly funny. Whereas if we look from the perspective of physics, what do they want? They want to become a unified information field, don't they? But they are limited. They cannot become a unified information field. I'll put it simply. Can your gadget become a unified internet?
No, it is limited, of course.
You can write something there. You can read something from there. But it will never become the internet because it's a huge network. That's how it turns out. Friends, that desires and easy tricks from Shaitan, which people get, actually lead to this.
They carry people away.
And do you know what the problem is? The problem is that their experiences and their fairy tales affected other religions as well. Just recently, I listened to a hero monk. I gave you to listen to him. You started smiling. Who was telling almost the same nonsense, how they dry sheets on themselves and say that this is spirituality. That
He boils a bath.
yes, he was carried away in general. He fought the devil so much. He's such a hero. A man gets into a cold bath and water begins to boil up under him. That's how he fought the devil. He's such a saint. He has no unholy bone in his body,
Yes, a sheer boiler.
Do you know what the funniest thing is?
Yes.
That a lot of fools,
Listen to him.
there is no other way to put it, they listen to, believe, and admire this idiot. Well, as long as we live by primary consciousness and perceive this nonsense from everywhere by means of primary consciousness, and as long as we are controlled by secondary consciousness, we will never become a human with a capital letter H as personality. We will never become equals among the equals. After all, how many examples have there been? Buddha. He really told the truth. We won't list all of them. Jesus. Who can be superior? The last prophet. The best among people at all times. What else do people need? No. Shaitan says this is wrong. Shaitan says the prophets could be mistaken. This man or that man, or the man who wanted to kill them, or who killed them, that one is a saint. Right? Isn't it so?
Unfortunately, it is.
Look how he deforms our consciousness. Shaitan says, love is good. Fine, everything is great. Love each other. Why does God need your love if He gave you the opportunity to love one another? Not with that love, not with true and real love, but with a simple, mundane love, like one dog loves another. They have loved each other and run away. Isn't that so? What else does Shaitan give? He says, if you receive power, you dominate everyone. Can you have power over the crowd without God's blessing? Only God gives that power. Isn't that so?
It is. It's the Lord's favor.
Right. The prince of this world, who endows his slaves with power, says that.
And he tempted Jesus. He offered him this power, yes.
Jesus was offered power by some Shaitan. That's the answer. But people gladly pick this up and fight for it. They fight for hallucinations, fight for fairy tales from Shaitan, fight for anything, for a piece of bread in this world, for a warm place. They fight for everything except life.
Igor Mikhailovich, I would also like to discuss with you the following point. A lot of people really spend their lives on achieving the state of thoughtlessness. But when they face this thoughtlessness, even for a short period of time, as they say, now there is absolute calm, thoughtlessness like a glassy lake. They realize that there is actually no love. So what are they doing wrong? Or what would you recommend to such people? Is it possible to achieve this total thoughtlessness in this life? Basically, that which many people devote their whole lives to.
It's a good question, right? But we will answer it next time, friends. Thank you for being with us. Let's just love each other sincerely and truly, and not the way Shaitan suggests to us. And let's rather strive to live than observe this illusion through the prism of various demons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Igor Mikhailovich.
Thank you, friends. Thank you for understanding, and thank you for striving. When life is felt in you, it becomes much more pleasant to the spiritual world, and this world gains a meaning. Thank you.